Welcome to In Conversation, presented by The Future of Art. In a world of fleeting headlines and quick takes, we dive deep. Here we unravel the intricacies of the mind, the philosophies, and the passions of our guests. We believe in the art of conversation, in the magic that happens when you go beyond the surface. So join me, your host, Ayla El-Moussa, as we wade into the minds of some incredible individuals. From intricate details of atoms to the vast expanses of digital landscapes, one artist brings the world of nature and technology together in a mesmerizing dance. Jesse Woolston, a pioneer in crafting large-scale installations that span the globe. He captures the delicate equilibrium between the enchanting allure and the underlying terror of our planet. Today we are privileged to embark on a journey through art, nature, ego, death, and beauty. Welcome to a conversation with the visionary Jesse Woolston. I believe it was a few episodes ago, Roger was interviewing me for The Future of Art, and we had this incredible space. And when he asked if anyone wanted to come and ask me some questions, Jesse Woolston came up on stage, and we had this incredibly interesting dialogue just between us two. It was really fascinating because I think for about 10 minutes, it was just Jesse and I going back and forth in this incredible way. And after that finished, I was like, this would be an incredible podcast to do artists in conversation. And I thought, after a few days, I was thinking about it and I was like, well, why don't I lead that? And then I pitched the idea to Roger and I was like, this would be, I think, a really incredible sort of sub-arm of The Future of Art, because you're telling these stories of these incredible artists and kind of getting into their ethos and how they think. And for me, I find it even more, interesting to go deeper, but not just as an interview, but really a conversation between two artists. So for this first kind of episode 0, if you will, I would love for Jesse and I to get back into that dialogue together and kind of set the groundwork for what I would love to become a very interesting, fascinating podcast of two individuals just kind of really going back and forth for philosophy, art, life, things that are interesting to them. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, 1920s Riviera, we're sitting in the sun somewhere, Picasso and all of these Dali artists are, having these incredible conversations, which they did. And I find that in this moment in time, with this sort of birth of this technology and push towards art, what better way than to sit on our technology and pretend we're somewhere sipping champagne in the streets of Paris and dialoguing about art. So, Jesse, I would love to have you up, maybe say a couple words, and then what I will do is kick it off with some questions I've been considering.
Sounds good. Hello, everybody. First of all, I'm going to be a bit cheeky. I'm just going to say how much I love Joey. I think Joey and your trader are absolutely amazing people. I got to meet him for the first time in New York earlier this year, and I was like, okay, I love this dude. Like, he's going out into the corners of the world and capturing this beautiful quality of humanity, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I need in my life to enrich it. So Joey, I bloody love you, mate. You're a legend. But first of all, Ayla, how are you today? How's it going?
It's wonderful. I just came back from a drive. I saw some dolphins eating. I'm sipping some great coffee. I am so ready to chat.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, wonderful. Well, I mean, okay. So I guess I'll do a one-liner about me. I'm an artist and a composer. I'm from New Zealand, and I make things. That's what I do.
Yes, you do. And so I'm just going to kick this off right away.
Yeah.
And what I find really interesting, and to kind of parallel our artworks, is we both work in the fascination and love of the ocean. Primarily, I would say there's obviously, different branches that we go out on. But I think the core that kind of drives us is our love of the ocean. And what's fascinating to me is you work on it in this really, atomic wave level, and you're coding it, and you're kind of, when you zoom into your artwork, you see these tiny, small, I would say, circles that to me represent atoms, which is what we're all created from. And I find that really interesting because I parallel it, I would say, with the idea and the symbolism and the archetype of what the ocean means to me and how I try to represent it in my art. And when I was looking at both of our artworks, I found really interesting is that recently I've kind of been going further into that idea of confining the ocean, and I've been doing it, very deliberately inside an inverted triangle, and there's all of this reference to alchemy and how that means, like, how that parallels to the symbol of water, the divine feminine. You kind of this kind of undercurrent mythology, dreams, subconscious. And then when I was looking at your artwork, you also kind of confine this chaos and this incredible energy of wave inside a box. And I would love to just hear about that process and like why that.
Yeah, you know what? Why don't we jam on a part of what you said first, and I'd love to get further into the container, because I find this quality interesting, right? So my entire life, I've spent trying to quantify reality, and what I mean by that is like, okay, how do human beings, how are they in the world, and how do they relate to nature, the universe, the things we see, how we perceive reality? You know, you can get into philosophy talk about it, but I've really tried to quantify it as in understand these qualities. So for me, it's like when I look at the ocean, look at nature, I'm trying to quantify and understand the most fundamental, like absolutist quality of nature. And then I'm trying to almost do the same thing with a human being to kind of bridge the gap between the two. So and through that process, I'm trying to capture the raw, the chaotic, the intense, the terror, the awe of nature. Because I think that's truly like a deeply human, profound experience. You know, like I'm really trying to leverage the 200,000 years of human evolution to create this moment between artwork that is hyper designed for our eyes, our ears, our minds. You know, all go through the list, but then also respect and understand, like, okay, what is it about nature that is the most purest essence of nature, and then having those two collide together in this one moment between those two. That's my approach, right? But your approach is more about like, okay, like what is it? What does the essence represent? Like, how does it appeal when it comes to history? More of like an energy, the quality of masculine and the feminine. Like, what like how does that represent these things? So it's almost like we are exploring nature, but on two different poles. I'm very much more focused on the computational quality, even though I don't think that's very important. And you're focused on more the essence of the water and the ocean. Does that sound similar?
Yeah, it sounds similar, but it's what's interesting to me is we kind of almost end up in a very similar spot because we're coming at it from two different poles, but essentially it's all about the human experience and how we interpret, which I think all artists do in a way. So it's just fascinating to me that we both kind of really approach water and nature in this.
Yeah, I mean, well, like when you're working, like what is your goal? Like for me, like I want someone to stand in front of a bloody enormous tsunami and be like, if this is real, I'll die. But this is enormously profound and a beautiful experience, and now I can have a truly human-centered experience with nature in a new, real way. Whereas, like, what's funny is that when you approach it, it sounds much more lovely and happy and peaceful and kind.
Yes. I mean, that's what is interesting right there is you talk about the kind of the chaos and the terror and the violence of nature, but within that, I mean, when you look at violent chaos, it's usually quite beautiful, especially when you're a spectator.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I quantify as sublime. You know, like if you go through history, everything from Longinus back in the Greeks to all the way through Burke and Kant, it's like they've all kind of tried to tap it. And then you also see it with like the reason why I love the Romantics is because they kind of were like, all right, how on earth do we kind of capture religion in landscapes? Like, how do we bring back this, you know, because everything was intellectualized, which is good because you want people to be educated. But like, how do we approach representing the divine, the supernatural, the larger than life, the the power of quote unquote God within art.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that whole string of the Sublime where it looked at like, okay, this relationship between the individual, the viewer, and the enormous landscape that they're standing in front of. And I think like that to me is what I'm trying to capture with the work. I think that is an amazing quality that I see at least in every single like form of history, whether it's religion, whether it's art history, whether it's just like sciences. Obviously, just space exploration is another quality where it's like, okay, you go up into space and you have the I remember what it's called, the effect when you look, the overview effect as an astronaut. Like it completely alters your entire perspective on life when you can have that experience. And I think like that to me is a quality and something that is almost a guiding light for me, right? Like I'm trying to like really capture that. And also, if I'm going to be honest about it and really try to capture nature in a way that understands human beings, it needs to be honest. It needs to be both terrifying and beautiful. You know, like that's why, like, for instance, a simple like example with my color palettes, like I don't use super beautiful, perfect balances. I love to throw like things that look bad because it's dissonance. Not exactly, because it's not about perfection. I think perfection kind of makes things look dull and boring. It's about like, oh, what is the honesty of this representation? And to me, the honesty of nature is both that positive and negative emotion that can be stirred in a human being, and that's the honesty of what it is. It's like, and me talking about like the violence of it all and that kind of thing. It sounds like it sounds pretty out there, but it's not that. It's not the effect of that violence. It's the pure honesty and the explosivity and the like the core of it. So when I look at a tsunami, like I obviously think that results of a tsunami is horrendous. Like people losing things, and it's horrible. Yeah. But if you look at the core mechanism of that explosivity and how like plates move and things like that, that to me is like, wow, that's a profound thing that is devoid of human culture, everything. It just is. Yeah. And I think that's really powerful, right?
Yeah, that to me is what's that point, right? You just said it is, because nature is neither violent nor kind. It just is. Nature exists as it exists, and it's not thinking, oh my God, I ruined this city or I killed this lion. It just survives, and we are part of that, which I find so interesting because, like you said, we attach all of these emotions and human qualities, which are what make us fundamentally human, right? Emotions, and I think consciousness, even though I don't know that we fully know what consciousness is, which is, I feel like, another rabbit hole to go down. But that's something we're still trying to discover within ourselves, within AI. But that's kind of what sets us apart from being a tree, yet we are the tree. The atoms that make up a tree, eventually when we do die, we melt into the ground that nourishes that tree, so there's this interesting concept of nature just being, and I think that is the crux of what your art represents, is that moment of just being.
Now, because it's what it should be, It's like if I'm gonna simulate nature, like I have to be respectful. Like it needs to be in its most pure form, the representation of the whole. Like if I just decide to be like, all right, I'm gonna like, have a fluid model and then kind of like bullshit my way around it, so to speak, or even just like speak as if it's not what it is. Like, I don't know, I feel like that would be disingenuous. It's like the point of the work, like the point of the art is not actually about me. It's about that moment between the human being and nature. I'm just the vehicle for it. Like if I'm doing my job, I should get out of the way as fast as I can, right? Like, so it's almost like if I'm going to be a real artist, quote unquote, and a Puritan, I guess, like it really is about maximizing that moment between those 2 points. That's why like my whole life I've spent trying to understand music and the eye and like the mind, and then even looking at plenty of studies that revolve around like what happens in the subconscious when you actually view artworks and how is it a personal experience. Like it's all been about like how do I actually understand the 2 points, and then how do I connect those in the most efficient way possible?
So now I just kind of want to touch on this point, because this is also something that I've been considering and thinking about, which I believe comes with being, quote unquote, an artist, if you will. I mean, I think everyone in their own right is an artist, but attaching and detaching and letting go of your persona as an artist. Do you separate the two? And two, your ego? Because for me, and I feel like, I don't know if I'm alone on this, I highly doubt it, but there is a egoic sense, and I mean egoic and attached of myself attached with the artwork, where I feel I get an ego boost, and I get a sort of this rush of self, and it's really sort of my lower self, not my higher self, if you will, that when I'm putting out this artwork that I feel good about, I get this kind of attachment to it, which is really interesting, because I create it because I create, and that's how I see the world, and this is sort of how I move forward and how I exist as a person. So I don't think I can detach my said artist from Ayla, because that is who I am at the core of me, I would think. I mean, I'm still kind of working through that. But when I put an artwork out into the world, especially one that I'm very proud of and I feel good about, do you hold a sense of like, I did that, I made that, and I want people to see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good conversation because it's a discussion on like artist identity, but also like just being a human being. Like if I create something, I want people to like it. Like that's just intrinsically human, right?
Yeah.
Like that's part of it. But there's something that like I have discovered. So part of the reason why I've really enjoyed for the last like 15 years building installations and like public art, because it's allowed me to like really observe and understand people. And like some of my biggest moments have been when I've literally just heard conversations in the background and people don't know that like I created something, and I get to understand like truly what is actually happening in the mind and the body when someone observes something. And it's something that I figured out. Okay. And like, I don't know, like I'll just speak freely about it. So, I mean, this gets into like the mechanisms and actually what happens when it comes to, I think, the psychology of the viewer and then the artist. So, and I don't get to talk about this much, so this is fun.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people almost like miss the how the vehicle is being deployed when it comes to art and culture, right? So what I've noticed is that when an artist creates something, right, obviously it's very personal and it should be highly developed and should have a reason for it to exist and it should be a vehicle. But what I've noticed is that the viewer attaches all of their feelings and all of what you bring up through your own art to the artist, because they need an object to attach to be like, you're the reason why I feel this way. When in reality, actually what you're doing is, if you're a good artist, it's not really about necessarily you in your pure expression exactly, but it's about how you can have the viewer relate and attach to the work through your work. So it's like, okay, like if I create something, someone's going to be like, oh my goodness, I feel something profound. It's like, that's something between you and nature. That's nothing to do with me. I just was able to bring it out of you.
But you're the vehicle for.
Yeah, but the viewer goes, it's you, right? So it's like, for me, it's almost like this trick where I'm like, you think it's me, but it's not. I'm just showing you what you already know and feel because you're a human being and I'm a human being. And we both share the same evolutionary pathways and feelings and psychology for the most part, right? So it's like this weird understanding that no matter what happens with me, I don't really care. Like, it's not really, for me, like an example of like, if I ever, it's probably not gonna happen, like the whole idea of fame and like, being a highly regarded artist and like musea, like none of that really matters, because at the end of the day, it's not me, it's what I'm able to elicit in the viewer that is the reasoning for everything else, right?
So let me just ask you, so when you're, because this is what's fascinating too, is because with my artwork, I am so much present in the piece because I use my body as a vehicle, but it's really not, like you're saying, it's really not about me. And I don't want someone to, well, actually, I don't really care how you look at my work because you view it how you view it. I don't want to tell you how to view it. But for me, when I'm creating it, I'm so much not present in the work as I am present, because it's just a vehicle for a story that I'm trying to tell, or like a symbol that I'm trying to communicate. But I still find that there is so much an essence of me in the work because it is so personal. And I'm curious with you, does that, I mean, I feel like it has to come through. There is an element of you, for sure, of Jesse in this, movement and in this chaos. So how much do you think about that when you're creating? Like, do you kind of it just pours out of you, and it just is sort of, this is me, and then you kind of build on top of it in terms of like how you would like the viewer to see it and conceptualize it? Or do you, at the end of the day, do you just fully remove and you're like you said, you know, I just want you to have a conversation between you and nature, and I was just sort of the vehicle?
Yeah, I mean, I also appreciate this pivot, right? Because I've been obviously talking about like, all right, the viewer, etc. But because I understand that I'm going to be figured out and sorted regardless, right? Like if I create from an authentic place, it doesn't matter. Like I'll be stoked because it's like a pure noble intention when it comes to creating the artwork, right?
Yeah.
So for instance, like if you know me, you know that the artwork I'm creating is so dialed into who I actually am, but I just don't talk about that on a personal level. Like, but it's it's 100% me. Like it represents every single thing I am as a human being, and all that I will ever be, and all that I have been. Right. So the reason why I put less emphasis on that is because I've noticed that I don't need to add more for the vehicle. The vehicle kind of already does the job. So if I sat there and I tried to be like, now let me talk to you about my experiences and whatnot, it kind of, I feel like it's not necessarily needed right now because people get it.
Yeah.
You know, so and I don't want to complicate it, you know?
Totally. So there's a few, this is going to be a two-pronged question in a way, which you've sparked. One is, when you go to a gallery or you go to a museum or you see an artwork, do you stand in front of it and experience it and then read what the artist says, or what, you know, we kind of have written on those tiny plaques? It's like, how do you approach looking at art yourself? Like, do you want to know the artist's concept and their meaning behind it before you view it? Or do you go there and feel it yourself and then leave or read? Or like, how do you approach looking at art yourself?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so this is interesting. So I have a little ritual that I do where if I ever go to a museum or a gallery, and I'm not going to, you know, to see friends or support someone, I like curate a playlist of my favorite works that are usually quite dynamic and emotional, and I literally plug in my headphones and walk around. And what I do is like I approach it where there's like two parts to it. The first one is like an emotional subconscious response, which is like I will stand in front of an artwork and just feel it and try to, like, you know, do as you do as a human being and be like, what does this make me feel? How does it attach to my own personal experience? What is it about this that is compelling? And then I'll move to understand the conceptual quality of the work. And I think when both of those are together, that makes very, very powerful artworks. And I've noticed that when, like, for instance, like I recently did like a curation for an Art Tank Tuesday, and I was going through a lot of different artworks and there was no description. And I was like, that just almost takes up 50% of the artwork for me. It's like, I want to know, like, tell me about why this is significant and important to you. Share your experiences. Like the point of artwork is honestly, art is to me like the most beautiful thing in society, where you can be the whole of you, the whole of you as a human being, and use it to connect to others and bypass all culture and reasoning and everything. So it's like, share with me why this exists and how powerful this is for you, right? So it's like there's two folds. It's like, I think the emotional quality is really important, but the intellectual, conceptual quality is also very important. But when those two mash together, that's like chef's kiss, you know? I need both. Yeah.
So then there's like a very kind of a question that I did a poll with recently that I really find interesting, and like how it processes. And I think it changes as you create in that flow state. But what do you, like, you yourself, when you're sitting down to create an art piece, what do you consider more? Is it like the concept? Is it the process of how you make it? Or at the end of the day, is it your aesthetic output?
Okay. Yeah, I'll put these in a tier list. So first one's concept. Like, I think that's significant, the process, and then the aesthetics. I'll go into reason for each. So the concept is like, to me, it's like, well, first thing is, so the artwork I'm making, I've been thinking about for ever since I was a teenager. Like, I've been really trying to find and search for, you know, like this, as I talked about, right? Like, what is the most powerful thing I can use to create that profound human experience for somebody? And conceptually speaking, when I sit down to create something, I always ask the question, like, why should this exist? Like, if I just create something, it's just adding noise to the environment. Like, it's actually going to be a detriment to the art society I'm working in. Because if I just create something and put it out, it's like, okay, but so that's an exercise of craft, but it's not actually anything that's going to move anybody. Right. So I always go like,
how do you know that though? How do you know? Like, sometimes a sketch or just like you're trying to figure something out, and that moment there is actually really like could be really important. It might not mean so much in terms of like concept, but the way you figure it out, I think it does mean something, I would think. But continue.
No, well, you touched on the process, right? So when you create something, you're like, oh, this is cool, but like, I have no reasoning for it to exist yet.
Yeah.
You can have the flip side of it, and then you can, work on it for the next week or two or whatever, how long it takes, and then the purpose reveals itself to you. That's when you know it's becoming a whole piece of artwork, versus it being like, I don't know, this is kind of cool. And obviously, like, I have my opinions, and it's completely subjective, but I do think that there needs to be like a reason for it to exist, as well as that process that is executing that reason.
Which is interesting. Is interesting because that reasoning, it comes back down to the ego and the self, because you think it should have a reason to exist, which I find like that to me is so fascinating as an artist, because we're kind of, I don't want to say curating, but we kind of are our output, right? So we're like, I believe this has a good enough concept to exist, so here the world can see it. But I think removing that ego is so hard, because it kind of is part of being an artist, and almost having that not drive to put something out, but the bravery actually to sit and take something from your inner mind, your dream, your something that you're trying to figure out, and put it out for the whole world to judge and to see is, I think there is an element of bravery in that.
Oh, no, I agree. I think being an artist is like, I think about when I was first starting, like I was terrified to put anything out. And it's just like, it is terrifying, because like you're opening yourself up to the world, and there's billions of people out there that have completely different opinions and very diverse, and that's amazing. But you are opening up opportunities for you to be shot with arrows. Like it's just, and it is very vulnerable. So it's like, I kind of, what I always, okay, so this is something that might be like useful in terms of like how I see it, is if I develop an artwork, okay, that is actually well developed, everything in that list that you just said is down pat. I don't really care anymore, because I know every single thing is fundamentally thorough and thought through. Right? It's like the old saying of like, you don't get nervous when you just prepare, something like that. There's like there's that level of preparation where you're like, this artwork is so distinctly
to the best of my ability.
Yes, exactly.
Like I've basically tried as hard as I can and put the full effort of whatever, and my mind, my thoughts, and it's out. So you can crucify it if you wish, but it's so fully who I am and thought out that you kind of like go for it and let's have that conversation.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the way to get around like all of it, to be honest. Like when I put something out, I'm very detached to it. Like,
interesting.
It's like it's all that I am, and now it's for the world, whether they like it, dislike it, whatever. Whether it does well or doesn't, I don't really care. Like it's just more about like, how can I dial something in and really try to maximize that experience for the viewer. Right.
What's interesting to me is sometimes I'll be in that creative flow, and I feel like as artists, you kind of get your workflow down and you get your process down. So it's not something you consider so much because it's already ingrained in you and that's how you workflow. But sometimes for me, what's interesting is I do focus a lot on aesthetics. I do love beauty. Like beauty to me, I know it's not so easy to, look at something, like a Francis Bacon, for example, right? There's a lot of this dissonance moments, but there is something so incredible in that artwork. But for me, I love this idea of meditation and just something being, like the Romantics, like it's very beautiful to see the world in a grain of sand, kind of like in this poetic Greek Romanesque. They were really focused on beauty, and I know there's like such a conversation now in 2023 with what beauty is. But for me, sometimes when I'm focused on that, I actually, by divine intervention, or I have like the muse whispering in my ear, is the concept will click. Like sometimes I'll be just sketching something and I'm like trying to focus on the pose or the beauty, and then I'll see a symbol within that work and I'm like, like this is an archetype for, alchemy and how they were trying to find at the end of the day the philosopher's stone. And then I go into that rabbit hole and that process leads me to a concept. So has that ever happened where you're like, kind of in the throes of like outputting your simulations, I want to say.
Well, actually, okay, wait. This is perfect though, because I'm glad you shared your experience, because this is interesting. So I'm on one side of the spectrum where I'm gonna, if I was gonna live for 1,000 years, I'd probably think about a single art piece for 1,000 years. It's just that I would do that, right? But what's interesting is that on your end of the spectrum, you're like, in the process, I develop the concept sometimes. Like sometimes I click. But I think what I love about that is that at the end of the day, like as long as you have the concept, who cares how you got there? Like sometimes that just happens. And I say that too because I found that with music, where I'd be like, all right, I want to capture this emotion. There's something here that I just want to capture, and I'll just start jumping on the piano. I wouldn't know what I want to do with the song, and then or a composition, and I'll just in the act of working on it, I'd find myself at the end being like, oh, this is exactly what I tried to capture with the concept. So it's So when it comes to like the visual quality, and the artwork, I spend a lot of time thinking about the concept first, but in the process, there are ways and things that occur to create that concept. And another point too, before we move on, because I do want to talk about the aesthetics. What I found is that the process, when it comes to like an art process, the most like bulletproof way that I've ever found to build that process is to work authentically, and then eventually you'll find the perfect paintbrush that clicks with every single thing in your brain. So what happens is with me, is that like I was thinking about these conceptual things for a very long time, got exposed to art in a container 11 years ago, and I was like, oh my God, you can capture nature in this and it looks 3D and people can suspend their disbelief. This is absolutely madness. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to throw myself at learning simulations, understanding fluid flow, design, all that stuff, right? And I absolutely fell in love with that process. And it itches every single component of my brain, that and paired with music. So now it's like it's a very, very easy thing for me to do. I find the idea process absolutely expansive and a beautiful thing to talk about, because you find your lane, so to speak. Yeah. And then often the concepts are very easy to build off of that when you just find that thing. Yeah.
Because the thing is it's all, I always liken this, like humans continually repeat ourselves in cycles. Yeah. And it's so we find maybe new tools and like new technologies to repeat the same things over and over again. And I think that's sort of the gift and the curse of being a human, right? Because we're somehow programmed, whatever it is in our genetic programming, to really repeat the same things time and time again. So it's just these fundamental qualities of being a human. And I'm going to slowly pivot to another.
Wait, can I make a point?
Yeah, of course.
No. Well, okay, because I just I love that though, because here's the thing. And I might have actually, I might have shared I see Sam there. I might have shared a DM with him, but I don't know who said it. He might have said it or I might have said it, but it's like the consistent and the constant, okay? Like there's two things that I see when it comes to history, and I actually look at those and I go, those are beautiful things. People before me have figured this out. Like why wouldn't I look at 200,000 years and be like, oh, we have this really strong relationship with nature. I'm in an era where I can use technology to build giant tsunamis. It's the most perfect art form. It's like, to me, it's like, yes, this is exactly what I need to be doing. I have the whole of humanity behind me, and they're like, hey, please push this forward. You're in an era where you can actually do things with technology. Come on, So it's like, I look at it as this beautiful thing where I see the way, like everywhere in every art form and all of humanity. It's like, it's this beautiful thing that I've been able to look at. And I love that, because to me, it's like the ultimate point with my artwork is I want someone to feel something so profound and think about the universe and themselves. It's like, I don't know. I love it.
It's interesting because sometimes I'll look back, there's this famous quote by Nietzsche. It says, God is dead.
Yeah.
And he's really kind of talking about this idea of, I think this was back when Christianity was kind of religion was sort of losing its influence, and, science and Western culture was coming into the forefront of how we believe and perceive the world. I think science now could be considered a religion, right? Because that is a way that we perceive the outlook and things. And there's almost this idea that it has to be right. There's no room anymore for I would say a conversation or to kind of unwind and unweave a certain framework of thought, right? It's just, let me Google it. Science says that such is such. But sometimes I kind of get frustrated because I'm like, there's another quote by Picasso, which I don't even know Picasso said this, by the way. I think this has just sort of like been built into the mythology of Picasso that good artists borrow, great artists steal. Mm-hmm. And I get into this sort of like frustrated mode because I'm like, just because someone that we, who I would say altered art history in a way that we perceive things. It wasn't just him, by the way. There was a plethora of other artists who were just into that Cubist movement that kind of altered the way that this, you know, the French and the way art looked at what art was. But I get frustrated because I'm like, okay, just because he said it does not mean that I can form my own opinion of it. And so looking back at history, sometimes I get like frustrated because I'm like, okay, now I'm just building on what he's saying and I'm not forming my own opinion. But then I know, of course, my own opinion is formed from all that was before me. So it's this weird kind of like
I see what you're saying. I mean, it's foundational material. Like, it's like, okay, like, so like I obviously have built off people before me, but like, when you sit there and you look at stuff and you're like, this is dope. It's like, that's not enough in terms of like, to be thorough. Like, just because someone does something doesn't mean it is good, bad, or it's an influence or inspirational. It's more like what I look at it as like, all right, why are they doing that? What are they actually tapping into that I could almost like use as a mechanism to see the larger point of the work, the larger reason and whatnot. Another thing too is like popularization doesn't equate to origination. So the thing that I notice is that this is music, this is art. Like a medium is a community based. It's never one individual. It's always a group of people that are like, all right, let's explore these specific mediums and understand these things. So like when you have that understanding, you're like, okay, there's a group of people that are kind of saying something similar. What is actually the essence of this that they're getting at? And then that is where I find to be the gold, or the inspirational gold, right? The foundation for your work. So when you create, it's less about, oh, let's make cubism, and more like, why? Like, what was it? What was he narrating with the Spanish War? Like, what are the things that I could use within this like thread that could actually help me build upon or expand or think about that really was compelling at the time?
Because, I mean, it's true, because you think of that statement, and I would say Nietzsche is considered a great philosopher, but you could apply that to today, but I also disagree with it. I mean, there's like, he's basically talking about the, you know, the individual not having sort of, there's this absence of divine and this absence of sort of God, whatever God is. I mean, when I look at nature, I consider that God, because I do believe this is where we came from, right? And I find it so fascinating that humans are really destroying their God, if you will, because this is, without the planet, we wouldn't exist. So for me, there's this interesting concept, because if you look at TikTok and you look at Instagram and you look at all of these sort of dopamine rushes that we, you know, get addicted to, and there's this conversation that, you know, the divine is lost, but I also don't think that's true, because again, humans are kind of condemned to repeat themselves. So with the rise of that, there's always a pushback, you know, like if you look at fast food created the slow food movement. So for me, I think there is that, and you know, two things can exist in the same time. So for me, it's like, there is divine and there is artists. Like, look at us all here having this conversation. Like, there are people and there will always be artists who are kind of having that conversation of what it means.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you get everything with society. You get people that are like, this is great. People that go, this is rubbish. You get people that like, it's just like, that's the beautiful thing about like a sustained, developed nation, is that you have everything you could think about in one location. You know, and the other thing too is that I just had a brain fart. I don't know what I was going to say.
It's okay. But what I'll do is
what was the last thing you said? What was the last thing you said? Do you remember?
You know what? I'm forgetting, but I believe it was something. Shush. I believe it was like something along the lines of like, you know, we have both. There's both parallels, right? You have.
Yeah.
One thing cannot exist without the other, and both things can be true.
Oh, I mean, I was going to say, I I mean, like, look at me. Like, I'm trying to quantify quote unquote God with my work. Like, it's just like I'm a romantic painter is really what I am. Like, I'm trying to capture a John Martin painting is really what I'm trying to do. Like, I look at that and I'm like, oh, these people captured what the essence of what I'm trying to go for. Like, I'm going to try to get that in contemporary technology. So, like,
Beautiful.
you know, and so like, and I look at like religious qualities as like I kind of look at it as like, okay, it's not really the belief system. It's like, what is the essence and what are these things actually pointing to when it comes to human beings that create these divine, profound experiences. Like I look at cathedrals and halls and I like, you know, singing in choirs and whatnot and being like, there is something so beautiful about how Bach has approached his voice leading and these people sing it. And I'm like, what are they actually trying to do here? All right, they're trying to underscore this divine, this larger quality in this architecture. It's this larger than life, godly experience. And I'm like, okay, they're pointing at something. What is that they're pointing at? And then I'm going to try to leverage that. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because if you look at most religions, right, even science, everything began with quote unquote light. There was nothing and then something became, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's this beautiful, that kind of ties into sort of, I mean, we're getting a little ego here, but that's also what that's what ties into also for me being an artist. There was nothing and then there was something. And we are kind of, I would say, blundering through, but also just existing through this thread line of life and existence and creating visuals and also sonics for people to experience. And we're almost going to wrap up soon. I believe there is an incredible conversation happening shortly. But
I feel like we just started.
I know. We just got into the crux of like...
Oh, there's so much more to unpack.
I know. We need a few minutes longer, but with that, I'm curious, like when you...
We didn't even get to aesthetics, by the way. Like... But no, it's fine.
I feel like aesthetics are aesthetics. Like you like what you like, and beauty is beauty, and like, you know, if it feels good. But what you did touch on was interesting because you said you don't normally use like beautiful colors. There's a little bit of dissonance within the colors that you use.
Yeah, I mean, to me, aesthetics is just more about like how do you understand the human perspective of what is
beautiful in this
and non-balanced, and then how do you leverage that in order to convey? Do you want to look at something perfect, so you use very high symmetry and very, you know, a higher level of simplicity, or do you want to create something that is a bit off, so to speak, and then use dissonances? And like basically I think of aesthetics as purely just like the vehicle for the process and the concept. So like I don't want someone, for instance, to look at my work and be like, that is only just beautiful. I want to be like, that is beautiful, but also it kind of puts me off a little bit, but also, you know, like a mix of emotion. And with music, that's the whole point, is that you're trying to understand emotion, quantify that, and then actually elicit that. And oftentimes the best musical pieces are a balance of both the positive and the negative. And to me, the aesthetics is just the way to elicit that in the viewer. So it's like, to me, aesthetics is just subversive, really. You're just like, oh, you're going to like this composition because I have this balance, but I'm also going to put in these other things that make it a little bit gross, just so you can feel both of those ranges, you know?
I mean, I know with music, like I know for sure with music, I cry, but there's only been a very few pieces of artwork that I've stood in front of that I've actually just like cried. And one of them, I explicitly remember this because it was in the National Gallery in London, and it's this massive, massive painting. I actually don't even know who the artist is. My brain is forgetting, but the name is I think it was The Execution of Lady Jane Grey. And it might be it's just this execution of this woman, and it's the moment before, right? And so she's blindfolded, she's in this beautiful white gown, and I think the executioner, the priest, and there's some people, and they're basically helping her like put her head on the chopping block. And it's this beautiful moment where her hand is just like reaching out. And I remember standing in front of that being like, oh my God, this is like, I'm done. I'm finished. I was like emotional little ball. But so for me, I'm curious with you, music, I feel like is standard. I know for sure you've cried listening to music.
Yeah, 100%.
But with an artwork, can you remember or recall an artwork that just like, you don't even know who it was, or you do, but that really hit that like, that gut emotional, like I just stood there and cried.
Yeah, I mean, well, like what is cool about this is that, I mean, it gets into the conversation about like how art can elicit emotion and like the point of that, right? So like with music, the whole job is to try to like bring that emotion out of somebody, right? And I think the other thing too is art to me is the most beautiful thing in society, because like you can have people, here's an example, you can have someone that's like doing horribly in terms of life, and they're like, I have no outlet. There's nothing I can do. There's nobody I can turn to that's going to allow me to kind of like process. And they can put their favorite song on and just spend like 4 hours crying and be like, that's what I needed. Like
I needed that release.
That's such a profound thing that is possible and available to people. That's why like I'm so like deathly passionate about art, is because I understand the significance and how heavy a weight that is to even consider. So for me, it's like music, and both music and visual arts is like, that's how I see it. It's like it's an opportunity for someone to like feel something deeply human, process their own good feelings or bad feelings, but just create
process
that for them. Yeah, just like give them an opportunity to like go through that, because it's hard to sit there and be like, I'm gonna think about this and feel this, and I'm gonna process it myself. It's like that's a difficult thing to do unless you spend some time with introspection and, to be honest, a little bit of therapy. But so for me, it's like I've had both of those experiences where like there's pieces of music that I literally have cried to for hours on end, and then there's obviously artworks that I find to be incredibly beautiful. Like I remember a few years ago, I went to the Met, and I literally on like a Friday night, because I knew nobody was going to be there, and I sat in the by the fountain with the Greek and Roman sculptures, and I like sat there and I was just admiring and taken back by all this beauty that was around me, and I just was kind of stunned. Yeah. And I think like the cool thing about like, or the lucky thing about my personality is that I'm very open. So I really feel things a lot, which is like, to me, it feels like a superpower. So when I listen to this music, or I see these pieces of art, like it does have an impact, and I try to capture that, right? I'm trying to like, all right, this is appealing. I'm gonna
go back.
I'm gonna lock this away, and in the closet, and then when I sit down, I'm gonna pull that back out, and I'm gonna be like, that is the thing I need to capture. Yeah, so I'll try to use music or visual art for that. And I don't know, that was a bit of a tangent, but I think like beautiful things make me cry all the time. I think it's the most like incredible thing ever to be able to have that happen,
Which is interesting, because it's like we, as a society, almost look at aesthetics like, I know we retrospect at the Romans and the Greeks and go, they were or even Egyptians, they were obsessed with beauty, and they were obsessed with math and everything being in perfect proportion, which is natural, and yet it isn't, because that is all found within nature. And it kind of goes into this interesting question of like, what came first, math and like fractals, or did we create that and then implement it onto nature, right? Like this is, it's like, it's that never ending question of the chicken or the egg, but that's something that I find so interesting, because aesthetics and beauty is so, again, subjective, but we do, I don't know, we like, they were just obsessed with beauty. Like if you look at the statue of David, he's a god. He's a god. Like his body is just like an ideal man, but it is so beautiful to look at, like the way Michelangelo captured his statue. And if you look at that, it is beautiful. I mean, if you go closer, obviously there's cracks, and I believe the marble was like a throwaway marble that he used and created this incredible piece. But I find that beauty is I'm so drawn to beauty. And if you look at that paint, like if you look at that the execution of Lady Jane Grey, like it is a beautiful painting. It is a horrendous moment. Like she is about to die. I believe it's a true story too. Like, but it is in that like, which again, I know we should wrap up soon, and this is great. Great for me to learn for like podcasts too, but there is maybe something beautiful in death.
Even 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's a profound human experience. I think it's like it's gonna sound fucked up, but I'm looking forward to seeing what happens when I die. I want to know what that's like. That seems wild.
No, but I mean, but you can laugh about it. But I think there is something true. So there's this fear. I know for myself, like I'm terrified on how I'm not terrified to die. I'm not, because it's kind of the one thing that is inevitable. But I'm also just like, yeah, that is something that we're all, it's a shared experience that humans have. And it's so interesting that we can't kind of be like, turn around after we're gone and be like, yo, so this is what happened. But I think there is that, what you try to capture in that chaos and that sort of, and I also believe what I try to represent with the ocean, right? There's this beautiful yet ominous feeling of birth and death, and that's just one and the same. And at the end of the day, like we always say, we are of this planet and we will recycle into it. And it's just, I don't know.
It's incredible.
It's a beautifully scary experience.
Yeah,
but I feel.
Wait, hold up. You said something really, really cool though. That like I would like back pocketed in that state, and that like what you're saying. Okay, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so I sorry for interrupting. Okay, so there's one thing that I've noticed, right, is that like you're talking about the Greeks and the Romans and how we kind of like understand beauty. So there's one thing that I've noticed is that, to me at least, I see intellectualism separate from the emotional qualities of beauty. So like, for instance, we use mathematics, the Pythagoreans approach, like, perfect ratios in terms of population, and even just how they use sculpture, and like the idealistic concept of man. They're like trying to intellectualize beauty, right? But what I found is like beauty is much more of a, like, you can't quantify it, but it's much more of an emotional response. Like you just know when something is beautiful and masterful, right? So what I've noticed is that, and I actually learned this through composition, where like, you can sit down and write a piece of music and you can just follow the emotional quality of that music, right? Where you're like, oh, this just feels the thing that I want. And then what I do in my mind is I switch to an analytical view where I use like mathematics to solve problems and to kind of create a whole piece, but I capture that source of emotion. So it's like I separate the emotional quality of the beauty and the instincts that is actually its pure form of beauty. And then I try to like use intellectualism, so to speak, to kind of capture that and bring that out. So I think there's a separation there. I think we try to intellectualize beauty, and you do that through craft, right? Learning how to actually master your work. But at the end of the day, I feel like the beautiful thing that happens in somebody is much more of that emotional instinct that just occurs when you just know something is good. Like, when you have a meal and you're like, I don't know the chef, but I just know this is great. You just have that impression as you're eating, right? It's just there. You just know it's masterful. So anyway, I just want to touch on that because that was a cool point you made.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm going to literally say one thing and then we'll wrap it up. But for my latest piece, that I released, and when it turns into night, there's the golden ratio, and that was something that was an accident. I was very I mean, I'm terrible at math. I cannot count beyond my fingers, seriously, but I really appreciate math, and I understand how it works in nature, or I'm trying to. And I just by chance put the golden ratio over the pose that I had made, and it fit perfectly.
Look at you, trusting your eye.
And I was like, well, then, what came first? And is it perfect because it fits into that ratio, or is it that ratio? You know what I mean? So that was something that I think we'll definitely like break into another time. But as we wrap up, I would just love to hear from you for our next guest. I don't know who that will be yet, but a word of advice or a quote that you would love to leave them with.
Yeah, actually, I'll fire off a quote by Edgar Degas, where he said, he's a French impressionistic painter. He said, art is not what you see, but what you make others see. And I think that is a really profound statement where, like, obviously you could go with nuance and whatnot, but I think at the end of the day, the function of art and the work is to elicit that moment for somebody else through your own experiences and how you see the world. And I think that, I don't know, I find that to be a beautiful thing where you can, if you consider both sides of the spectrum, you can almost like satiate that internal hunger to create compelling works as an artist, but you can also see the lights go up in someone's face when you know that what you're making is authentic and honest and dialed into how you feel about the world and the universe. And like that to me is the best feeling ever. Like whenever I've done installations, I just love to like people watch and seeing their eyes light up and them being like, oh wow, I had no idea this was something that was out there in the universe and whatnot. It's like, that's such a good feeling.
That's such a beautiful feeling.
That's
a great.
That
reminds me slightly of this one statement. I believe it was Da Vinci, but it could be butchered throughout history. But something along the lines of, there are three people in this world. There are those that see when they are shown, and there are those that will never see.
I like that. Yeah.
Which is an interesting nugget. But without further ado, I want to thank the Future of Art, Roger, Jesse, for saying yes to this incredible conversation, and I feel like we will round it out with these beautiful statements. So Jesse, thank you so for sure we will continue this conversation. Roger, everybody in the audience, please also, if you have anyone that you would like, if you're an artist and you would like to have a conversation of this sort with somebody else, please DM me, Roger. And I would love to make it happen, because I really feel that this is something very special.
Thank you for joining us today. To explore more deep dives and engaging dialogues, visit the Future of Art podcast. If you are intrigued by our journey and wish to discover more about my work, I invite you to find me, Ayla El-Moussa, across all major platforms. And as we part ways for now, I leave you with a thought. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one small step. Until next time, let's keep the conversation alive and the inspiration flowing.